Morning, everyone. It's with great pleasure to welcome you to our Supply Chain Summit. It's been in the planning for some time, so great to see it materialize and great to see a lot of faces in the audience here in person. We have about 400 people signed up for the event in person and virtually, and that really represents a number of countries. I'll just mention 7 countries are involved in this summit. They include Belgium, Canada, Costa Rica, India, Japan, UK, and of course, the US. So let me tell you a little bit why we organized this summit. And it's been shaped over the past few months by discussions we had internally. We work a lot of supply chain, I'll say, dimensions and issues, but it's also been shaped by our sponsors, discussions with industry, and our academic partners. Really, the intent of this is threefold. One is to provide a venue or a place to have discussions and explorations of the various aspects of supply chain, and I'll emphasize security. It's really about the supply chain security that's relevant to MITRE working in the public interest, as well as our sponsors and industry, et cetera. A lot of us have gone through COVID over the past couple of years, and we recognize, supply chain has become a household topic. Most of us remember early on in the pandemic when paper towel shortage and toilet paper shortage and so on, and now chip shortage. These events highlight I'll say, the fragility of the supply chain. But I also want to sort of emphasize the security of the supply chain. Things that are tainted, things that are, we all remember SolarWinds and the software issues that it had in the supply chain. So we want to expose some of these considerations today. So that's the first, is really to have the discussions, illuminate the various aspects, but also, bring together thought leaders across this space and talk about how we move forward. So it's discussing the issues, but also what are the things that we could agree on, and what's the plans moving forward as a community, in a consistent, way that it's connected, that we could move forward. I'll say the last thing is to, what are those threads that cut across that are really, really important? And we'll have some panels today talking about various areas. What are those key threads? That's what we're after. So to achieve those goals, really we constructed the agenda accordingly. So I'll just briefly go over the agenda. We have 2 bookends to the agenda. The first one is going to be presented by Charles Clancy, who's our Senior VP for MITRE Labs and our Chief Futurist. And he's going to really set the stage on what's the challenge. At the end of the session, we're going to have our Senior Vice President for the MITRE Public Sector really iterate the next steps. So what did we hear through the day, and what are the handful of actionable things that we want to take as next steps as a community? We will also have a briefing by Bob Martin talking about the system of trust. It has been an internal MITRE initiative for a couple of years, trying to consistently describe risk, so that when we say there's a risk with a product, a vendor, a capability, a service, we're all talking the same language. And Bob is going to give a brief overview of the system of trust. Again, it's a foundational element to be able to consistently describe risk. We have 6 exciting panels, and I always say, get your second, third, fourth cup of coffee. We have the first panel is going to talk about software supply chain, and that's going to be led by Win Masters, who's a vice president for cybersecurity in MITRE. We're going to talk about supply chain policy, because when you get into supply chain, what's our national policies that impact the security aspects, the fragility aspects, the resiliency aspects of supply chain. That's going to be led by Julie Bowen, who is the Senior Vice President and Chief Counsel for the MITRE Corporation. And then we're going to shift a little bit and talk about, well, how do we institutionalize this area of supply chain in the government, various aspects. And that's going to be led by yours truly. Of course, microelectronics is in the news, and the supply chain of microelectronics, chips, for those who, I'm sure all of you are aware of the CHIPS Act that was passed recently. Again, how do we invigorate the microelectronic industry and the supply chain so we're not solely dependent on foreign suppliers, if you will. Again, the fragility part, but there is a security part as well, and that's going to be led by Nitin Shah, who is a member of the MITRE's Ingenuity team. Then we're going to shift into transportation, as I'll quote our Senior Vice President, Beth Minot, yesterday, saying that supply chain is about things and how we move things safely. So we can't really round this off discussion about supply chain without talking about transportation. And again, a few months ago, port congestion, Long Beach in California, how that port was, had ships, parked, for months without being able to offload. So transportation is a very important topic. And early on in the pandemic, how food and meat products were being transported across the U.S. created some shortage in certain places. So that's going to be led by Chris Hill. And of course, coming through COVID, medical supply chain, pharmaceuticals, that has its own set of challenges, again, availability, safety, considerations, and so on. And that's going to be led by Stephen Onedra. So really a rich set of panels, and we welcome all our panelists. And we'll say more, of course, as we introduce the panelists for each of these panels. But they're made up of industry, government, it's a mix. Again, to get to that first objective of having discussions about what are the main issues that we need to take some action on collectively. Again, our plan is to, as I mentioned, foster resiliency and security in many of these different types of supply chain. Find alignment where we can agree, acknowledge the differences. There'll always be differences. Let's acknowledge the differences and identify specific issues for these different areas and risks and how we move forward together. I will say this session is open to the press. So our press members have been invited, so treat that accordingly in the discussion. But we really want to have a vigorous discussion, ask questions, and have an opportunity to engage with the panelists and the briefers. It's really, this is intended for all of us to really spend the day, discuss this very important issue. So those are my opening remarks.